Around this time of year, students at that post-16 next step phase are incredibly important in terms of our focus as SENCOs and ensuring that schools are equipped to support in those transitions. Now, one of the kind of biggest barriers we know to accessibility for special educational needs and disabilities are all housed within that Equality Act, and it's important that we ensure that there are no barriers that are required for that young person to move forwards that aren't accounted for and or supported. So each of those protected characteristics must be a primary concern. Second to that, we want to establish the views of the young person. So what we know is often parents can be quite forceful in what they think and they want for their children, and that can't always work in the favour of the child when there isn't the voice of the child to temper some of those positions and requests and desires. So, this 360 approach that we need to take has to be and must be and only should be led by the voice of the young person and scaffolded by the abilities of the professional teams around them. For example, a young person might want to do something quite radical, and it's for us to support that young person to be able to orient their way in a realistic but aspirational way without being stifled. But equally, where we are able to manage their expectations and give them that pathway to that progress and that success. And with those vulnerable learners, there's just so many things to consider. We primarily start with the preparing for adulthood, and we think about those 4 different areas of preparing for adulthood and how we have supported that young person and aspirationally done so through the view of the young person collaboratively with the family and with the school, because this is where this family leadership really needs to be prevalent. And are we even reviewing those targets? So yes, we'll have an education and healthcare plan review, but we must ensure that we reviewed those targets. How are we collating that information, and what are we doing to make adaptations where they may need to occur? So in terms of the next steps post-16, we really want to make sure we're doing the work now. We're making those relationships with the next steps now. We're considering the needs of that young person, emotional regulation, for example, as a potential barrier for them. And how are we working with them to support them to manage that behaviour when they go to their next placement? Equally so, there may be some real concerns. So we'll take a medical example. It might be that your learner is tube fed and they need to be supported to move into their next steps, in the sense that where will they take their medications, where will they be able to clean their tubes, where can they eat, how would they like that to be, do they have a friend that is coming to this setting that could be their helper in that sense, what staff have been trained in that supportive way for that young person, how do we preserve dignity for something that's very sensitive and very, very important because can be life-threatening? Is there a risk assessment? Have you spoken to the relevant first aider in that space? Have you spoken to the relevant person who manages the risk in that space? Are student support aware? All of those things. So that's your medical side. If it was anxiety based, how would that person feel about moving into that setting? So could we expose them gently to that setting and then network them to a peer in that setting, network them to a key member of staff in that setting? And this is really about taking our time. So it might be that we just drive up to the building one day. And then if we think about those independent living skills and that independent travel ability, do we get the bus with that young person? Do we check how much money we need, how we are going to rehearse the actual route? Because we know often a lot of our young people can't manage that location-based part of that navigation of where they need to get to, and they become lost, and that can be incredibly stressful. Are they safe? Do they know how to keep themselves safe? All of these things are pre-steps to even getting through the door in the next place. Add in all of the anxiety around entrance requirements, outcomes, attainment, it can be an absolute cluster of concern. So what are we doing to map that in a really stable and supportive way, in a way that that young person and their respective carers and guardians can then replicate that going forwards and utilize that as a life skill? And then, it might be a social emotional difficulty. What are we doing to support? Is there an advocate? Are there opportunities for us to do social story work prior to moving into that setting, to manage expectations, asking the young person, do you have questions? Can you map those questions down? And then I'll be able to answer them, because actually asking young people these things on the spot is incredibly unhelpful. Don't forget abstraction, especially when we're thinking about our neurodiverse populations, just doesn't work. We can't imagine the concept. We need to feel it. We need to experience it. It needs to be tangible. I know Minecraft have been involved in a lot of this with schools, and it's been wonderful because it's that gamification aspect where you can take a virtual tour of the next space that you go to. So there might be options where you could tap into something like that. It may be if we had somebody who was visually impaired, for example, how do I get to the bathroom? How do I know the routes to certain places? Are there stairs with windows above them? Because that will really impair my ability to be able to move in those spaces. Doing that consultation and having that walk through is really important. Bringing in the service specialists to support who will likely be involved in that family as well. And things like the canteen. So are your senses so heightened in an auditory way that you will really struggle with that setting? What can we do to make sure this is an inclusive space for you that is manageable and appropriate? So there are so many things to think about. This isn't just about grade-based aspirations. This isn't about we'll get them on the books and make sure they can go. This is about really careful, sensitive, diligent, step-by-step support that is housed in the learner voice and their wants, needs, and requests.